Is a beautiful week of weather in Nebraska. Welcome to the Pick Six podcast. I'm Sam McKewon, along with Dirk, Chatelain, Tom Shatel, and Evan Bland. The fearsome foursome coming to you from, I think, our respective homes, although I hope we've all enjoyed the sun at some point today. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Doing well, Sam. It's one of those days where you actually want to get out of bed because the sun's so bright.
Oh, my gosh. This whole week has been awesome. Have you played golf yet, any of you?
No.
I'm tempted. I've been hitting some classic golf balls in the yard. That's about all I've allowed myself to do yet because I think the ground is still thawing, but I'm looking forward to it. It feels like spring. One of my favorite weeks of the sporting year as a kid is actually next week, and that's conference tournament week. I used to love conference tournament week because you got to see all the teams all week long, and that's usually when Nebraska's season ended. So that's usually what I'd be watching for. And so, that was always a bigger week in some ways than NCAA tournament week. But that is next week in a bizarre atmosphere that the Big Ten has deemed allowed to have 8,000 fans inside a dome. The Big Ten, which has not allowed fans all year long at any sporting event and is currently not going to allow them at baseball and softball events, will allow 8,000 fans in a tournament of its own making in Indianapolis. It's a great system.
Follow the money, Sam. Follow the money.
It's interesting. When I wrote the little blurb on that yesterday, I was like, everybody that I know and my own thoughts immediately went to, all right, are you going to let Nebraska baseball and softball have fans? And I had mentioned to Evan, I'm like, I'm surprised that Haymarket Park isn't putting on a virtual event this weekend where they allow the first 1,000 fans who want to show up at Haymarket Park to watch the game on the big screen.
Oh, it'd be a great workaround from the Big Ten.
And you can open it for concessions, and there's no way to stop it. There's no teams there. So you're letting them in the stadium and they're just kind of hanging around and eating, you open the concession stands, everything. I think that Haymarket Park should consider that. I mean, shoot, they got, 5,000 fans in PBA this weekend for the state tournament. So I think it's safe to space out 1,000 people at a baseball stadium and watch a game on a big screen, which I think they would do.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. State tournament's still over.
How about this, Sam? When Nebraska starts playing home games, just set up music risers outside the outfield fence, or bring in some pickup trucks or something like a small town, football field, and just let people watch outside the fence.
So how many people are going to be watching from the pedestrian bridge that connects Haymarket Park and PBA? Because you really can't look into Memorial Stadium unless you're in Old Father Hall. But you can see Haymarket Park from almost anywhere. There's going to be people doing loops on I-180 there, just going by the stadium over and over. Hey, everybody. It's spring. Thank goodness. We're getting there. Anyway, it's March 5th, and we're going to talk Husker hoops, which is rounding the corner to the end of its season, after which it'll have lots of conversations about going forward. The Big Ten tournament for wrestling starts today. Big Ten championships. Nebraska's number 3 in the country, and the two teams in front of them, I think, are in the Big Ten too. So, but Nebraska will do well there. So you wish them well. We'll talk more about wrestling as the NCAA championships approach, because that's always a really big deal. And then, of course, the Nebraska baseball season starts today, in Round Rock, Texas.
Round Rock, Texas.
I was just reading a story in the Washington Post today about Round Rock, Texas, and how it's remarkably changed, and how it was changed during the electric crisis that was down there. So that's why Round Rock, Texas was in my mind. It wasn't because the baseball team is starting there, but they are starting there. And so, Evan, at the back half of this podcast, we will have a robust preview of the Nebraska baseball team. Evan seems to believe they're going to be pretty darn good. And they seem to have a lot of the pieces. The question, as always, will be pitching. We will start with basketball in a minute. We're coming off the heels of a 102-64 loss to Iowa. Wow. But let me remind you that our sponsor is Team Schwabach. The Schwabach Agency is a family-owned all-state insurance agency with 4 licensed insurance pros, saving thousands of Nebraska Husker fans money. They sell home, auto, life, and fill-out insurance across Nebraska. They also insure all the big boy toys, and they're going to start coming out here in the next month. Motorcycles, boats, RVs, off-road vehicles. If you have a motorcycle, I'm sure you got out this week. I hope you did. If you've had your roof replaced in the last 5 years, give Daryl Schwabach, Kyle Schwabach, Nancy Mosek, or Kyle Murdoch a call at 402-590-5200. They can help you save a bundle. Free, no obligation insurance reviews and quotes. They're going to make sure all of their fans are properly protected. You can reach them again at www.nebraskaallstate.com or 402-590-5200. Thank you to Team Schwabach. All right, Pick Six podcast starts with an interesting week in Nebraska basketball. The Huskers win last Saturday. They win on Monday. They lose badly to Iowa. I mean, it was bad. 102-64, the worst loss in Fred Hoiberg's college coaching tenure. I haven't bothered to look if it's the worst loss in his NBA tenure. It might be, but
I doubt it.
In the NBA. But it's the worst in his college coaching tenure. And in between, the leading scorer of the team left the program. So people can take that where they want to take it. Go ahead.
Sam, I thought last night's, result as disappointing as it was, I think Nebraska winning basketball games was the bigger story of the week. And obviously Teddy Allen's departure was even bigger than that. I thought last night was, somewhat predictable based on the fact that Eduardo Andre, 175 pounds, was guarding 340-pound Luka Garza. That's not a matchup that Nebraska is going to win very often. I think the story is, what this team was able to do without Teddy Allen and what it means for the future. And I think, Nebraska obviously took a chance on Teddy Allen and it didn't really work out. I think it was mostly a waste of time. That doesn't mean that, there were bad intentions, but I think they've sort of realized that Teddy wasn't great for team chemistry, and going forward they need to probably make a bigger priority about how these pieces fit together as opposed to just assembling the best individual basketball players that they can find. So I think it was really important, that they got a little bit of confidence going into the offseason with this group and hopefully retain some of these guys, because the way it was going, I'm not sure anybody was going to be real interested in coming back to this thing.
Well,
how's that for optimism, Sam?
Attrition is common in college basketball. I think Nebraska will have attrition every year. Most teams have attrition every year. But I agree with you that it was enormously important that they won some games down the stretch. They clinched the 14th seed, the last place in the league, for the second year in a row. As it stands at this moment, I believe Hoiberg is 5-33 in the Big Ten. Probably the two best years in the Big Ten in a really long time, since maybe the 1980s. The 1980s in the Big Ten was the golden era of the Big Ten. But it's concerning. 5-33. Which is why the 2 wins in the last week were a big deal.
Yeah, I think, and I don't mean to jump in front of Evan and Tom here, but I think that, there is a path forward for this program. I mean, I think the league is going to be weaker next year. I mean, you're not going to have to worry about Luka Garza and Jordan Bohannon, and you're not going to have to worry about Kofi Coburn and Ayo Dosunmu, and it's going to be a different league. And if Nebraska can sort of find a roster that fits together better than this one did, I think they have a chance. Not to be the 8th place team, but to be the 10th place team or 11th place team, and maybe you make the NIT and you take a step forward. I don't think it's impossible to do that, but again, they've got to take roster construction a little bit more carefully than they have. I mean, this idea that you just basically take anybody who's out there and, this is a little bit different situation than Iowa State 10 years ago. And I don't think Nebraska is quite as appealing as Iowa State 10 years ago. And they gotta start thinking a little bit more about chemistry and how pieces fit together. I don't think they really did that this year.
I always kind of bring more of the go ahead, Tom.
No, you go ahead. You're first.
I was just going to say, I kind of bring a more perspective of the more casual observer. And when they beat Minnesota and then the way they beat Rutgers, that got my attention quite a bit to say, wow, this was kind of the vision, the cutting, the passing, the guys hitting shots. Like that's the vision on offense. And so I was a little more interested than usual in that Iowa game. And just to see them fall flat, I thought really kind of ratcheted the momentum back down. Whereas even if they had been competitive in that game, I think it sets up a lot more intrigue toward the end with maybe getting another win in the finale, seeing what they could do at the Big Ten tournament next week. But I don't know, maybe this just reverts to kind of the theme before this week, which is this team's played a ton of games in a short period of time. They're tired. And, I think to echo what Dirk said, like the roster just needs some continuity. When you turn it over to the extent that they do every year, you have no idea who these guys are that are coming in. They're learning on the fly. It takes a third of the season to develop any kind of chemistry. And then I think you throw in the fact that there just aren't a lot of in-state type guys for crowds to get behind. And you're having to learn about these guys in the moment. And I think that takes some of maybe the investment out of it, at least from a fan perspective too. So it's interesting to see kind of how recruiting will come together for this staff moving forward. And at this point, I don't know, you're just looking for some kind of bit of momentum, something that'll tell you that next year will be different than it's been the first couple under Fred.
Tom?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when Teddy Allen played for Nebraska. I'm also old enough to remember a guy named Bruce Chubbuck, my all-time favorite Husker player. Sorry, Eric Pikowski, I guess you're probably be number 2. They need a Chubbuck. They need a couple Chubbucks. Everybody wants to shoot. How about getting in there and I think Dirk Walker has been very good too, but they need some leadership. And I think it's interesting about Hoiberg. We have the impression he brings in transfers and all these guys, and it's all because he wants to do it now. But he's doing this like he's got a long time to do it, because I really believe this year was all about throwing everything into like, when the pasta's done, you throw it in that thing and you're shaking the water up. I think you wanted to find out who he had this year. I really don't think this year was, and fans that want to hear it, wasn't really about the wins and losses. The Big Ten was going to be awesome. It wasn't going to be a year where you counted a lot of wins. You wanted to find out what he had, and it's a weird way to do that, because you do want to construct your roster with a little more order. But I think he's going to be lucky that they didn't have a point guard. Who was their point guard this year? They did,
Now let's talk about that. Let's talk point guards and posts.
Point guard. And
what makes a good point guard? What makes a good point guard? I mean, you guys have watched basketball your whole life. What makes a good point guard?
He had, I think the kid's name was Royce White at Iowa State, who was like 6'8", and
he was a point forward, yeah,
for 1 year. So he's been unconventional, but it may be Trey McGowan's is this point guard that he found at the end.
Maybe
but he needs to get some, because it's ironic, because you come out of the timeout against Illinois and you can't run a play, and McGowan's was the guy in the middle of that. You got to have a point guard who can get people where they need to be and run that play. So I think having Teddy move on was a big step, but there are big steps ahead. But I really believe he's got to find a couple of guys who don't mind just being role players. Every good team has guys who just, who they are. They're at Creighton. It's Damian Jefferson, who was a big scorer in high school, and he took on the role and I'll do everything else at Creighton. And you need that guy at Nebraska, the Chubbuck guy. And so he's also adjusted into the Big Ten, as you've written, Sam. And that is hard for me to swallow, but the Big Ten makes you adjust to them. And so it's a little, he needs that big guy. He needs a little more beef. And I believe that's coming. He's going to have a score. But the roles have to fall into place here. You know, you do hate the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 system, but there is something to be said for knowing your roles. And I think they became a little more clearly defined. But yeah, people hate hearing, well, I'm sure glad, you know, I really respect them for playing hard. Well, yeah, they're supposed to play hard, but they did fight through it. And I think they hit the wall last night, and Iowa had a little something for him. You know, Iowa still remembers losing to him last year.
Yeah.
And, you know, Bohannon's a pretty cocky guy who likes to get after you. I kind of like him for that. I kind of hate him for that too. But he was on fire last night. It was his last game on that floor. And that was all on purpose. And they all had it ready for him last night. And, you know, Nebraska got hit in the mouth early and had no interest in getting back up. So, okay, that was supposed to happen. Now let's see him beat Northwestern. So that's, I mean, I think it turned out the way they played. I think Evan is correct. The last few games, last few weeks, you know, I've heard all year, mainly from one of my Creighton friends, that, well, Hoiberg, these players are too selfish. There's no character. There's this, there's no that. I think they proved that, have shown that they can run the offense. They do make the extra pass, and they're interested in that. They aren't that selfish. They were maybe the one guy who played like he was is not there. So I think there were some things to take out of the season. Now, what does that mean? That means there's a long way to go still, but I think that they can get there. They can get halfway there next year. I think they can make bigger steps next year.
I think the 2 or 3 biggest games of the year are coming up. Northwestern's a big game. You know, losing for the 3rd straight time to them, if you go all the way back to last year, would be, I think, a thing. And then I think the Big Ten tournament, they're probably going to play Penn State again, round 3. And if they win that game, they're going to play Wisconsin. And they can beat Wisconsin if they play well. So to me, those are the biggest games. Because if you can end this season on, you know, a fierce amount of momentum, then I think you can make a message. I want to go back to the point guard discussion for a second. My recollection over my lifetime of what a point guard is it's a guy that may or may not be the team's leading scorer, and oftentimes is not, but the guy who A, is a really good defender, and B, is an orchestrator on offense. So when I think of point guards from college point guards from my youth, I think of Tyus Edney. I think of Corey Beck. I think of the guys that, you know, North Carolina had. I think like Derek Phelps. I think of Bobby Hurley. I didn't like Bobby Hurley, but I think of Bobby Hurley. I think of Jason Kidd, who was the best player on his team, but also had like 8 or 9 assists a game. I think of guys who control the game, who can play at various speeds. They can go really fast, or they can slow it down, or they can lull you into a false sense of security and then blow by you. I think of guys who control the game. And I don't think Nebraska may have a guy on its roster right now, maybe McKewon's, but other than that, who really controls a basketball game where you're like, this guy just set this game to his pace. And Iowa has a guy in Connor McCaffrey, the coach's son, who does not care if he scores, and his primary job is to make everyone else's life on the court easier on offense. That's what he does, and he's good at it. And it helps that he's the coach's son, and so unselfishness is baked into the guy's body, right? Like, you know that Connor McCaffrey is doing what his dad wants him to do, and he's got the perk of playing for his father and pleasing his father by scoring 4 points a game. But Nebraska's got to find a guy who can orchestrate that offense and maybe isn't a score first guy, but is always looking to set other people up. And I'm not sure that that guy is on the team. I think they almost need their point guards to score too much. And, it makes a challenge. The other issue is post play. Now, Nebraska's not looking for Kofi Coburn. Well, they would take Kofi Coburn, but my point is they're not looking for a traditional, 3 feet from the basket kind of guy. They want somebody who can play out on the high post, who can pass, who can shoot a little bit, who can move around, who can screen. Derek Walker does some of those things, but they really need more guys like that. And Luka Garza, that's a good example. That's a guy that you'd love to get. And, that's why Iowa's so good. They're good because they have Garza, because they have a really unselfish point guard, and then they have guys all over the floor who can shoot. And in a lot of ways, what Iowa is what Nebraska ideally would one day be. I know we use Iowa State as the analog, and that's fine. This is a different league. Iowa plays in this league, and Iowa's style is similar to what Nebraska eventually wants to get to.
I
the
thought
pieces just aren't there.
I thought the same thing last night. I was like, you're watching Iowa's offense perform as it was, and Fred Hoiberg had to be thinking, man, that's what our system is supposed to look like. Sam, the most interesting person to me is, maybe it's obvious, but what is Delano Banton's role going forward? Because, this is a guy that a year ago we were hearing was the best player in practice.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm so tired of hearing, the best player in practice is the guy who's redshirting. That's like, that's one of the biggest cliches in basketball at this point. But,
well, you don't hear it from me. I don't do that. So.
Well, no, I didn't say I did hear it from you, but
right.
I heard it from a lot of other people. And Banton's problem, he can't make jump shots. Okay. So if he's not the floor leader, if he can't create offense, and that's what I consider the modern day definition of a point guard. It's not necessarily controlling the game. I think it's creating offense.
Right.
If he can't create offense, where does he play? He can't play the 3. Maybe he can, but if you're making 22% of your 3-point shots, I don't know how you play the 3 or the 2. He's not a 4. Like Delano Banton, Nebraska's got to figure out what they have in Banton next year. He's either going to, evolve and develop into the point guard that he was supposed to be, or he's almost, not going to play. And I think that's a really critical issue in the offseason. I think it's maybe the most important issue. And in addition to, incorporating Bryce McGowan's and, trying to find some outside shooters, but it's just, I think it's, the idea of a 6'9" point guard is intriguing in theory, but when it doesn't work out, man, it leaves a headache. And I think that Fred Hoiberg has to figure out what they have in Banton.
Yeah, I agree with that. That I think now, again, I think Banton can be the point guard. It's just going to take a change in maybe the way that some of the things happen. And there's also, he's playing it at times right now. At other times, he's kind of off the ball. He's posting up. There's some things that I like about him playing elsewhere. I do think his shot can get better. And I think he'll be a better shooter next year. So I do think that there's more options for him on the floor than just that position. At the same time, it would really be good if he was the kind of player who could do what, in many ways, what Connor McCaffrey does, only have a little bit more offense than McCaffrey has, because Connor McCaffrey is a little limited offensively. His younger brother's going to be really good very soon. But so Banton, I think, is a better overall player, but he's got to fit. He's got to be a little bit more of a distributor, and he can't average 3 turnovers per Big Ten game, which is what's happening right now. So his assist to turnover ratio in Big Ten games is 61-48, and that's less than ideal. He's a very good rebounder. Defensively, he was maybe the best player on the floor against Rutgers. His ability to close out on shooters is really key. But I think the challenge is that when you're playing high level teams in the Big Ten, then all of a sudden some of those things just become harder to do. And so Iowa kind of exposed those things. There is such a gap. Now, I understand the Big Ten is a really good league. There is a huge gap, between the top 5 teams in the league and the rest of the league. And I draw that line at Purdue. I think Purdue, they played horribly against Wisconsin, still won the game. I think it's those 5, and then a tier that includes Wisconsin, Maryland, and Michigan State and Indiana, and then everybody else. And I put Rutgers in everybody else. Rutgers is not an impressive team to me. They're going to make the NCAA tournament, and good for them for doing that. But when I watched them on Monday night, first I thought Nebraska would win the game, and secondly, my thought was Nebraska's posts, who have played a combined, 8 games together, that means Derek Walker and Eduardo Andre, outplayed the much ballyhooed Rutgers post players. And so my sense is that Nebraska is not that far away. I know this sounds overly optimistic. They're not that far away from number 9 or 10 in the league next year. They're really not, because I don't think that the bottom half of the league is that good. The top half, on the other hand, is unbelievably good. I mean, you saw, I don't know if you guys watched Michigan give it to Michigan State last night, but Michigan's just in a different class. I mean, they can totally outclass teams. And so I talked to John Beeline yesterday for about an hour, and that was helpful. Of course, the former Michigan coach and now the BTN analyst. And he was really great. He's a big believer in Nebraska. He thinks that but his line was, Nebraska's got to get somewhere around the middle of the league, that 8-9 spot. And then they've got to try to find a way to get up from there. He's like, you can't really do anything until you get to the middle. And then he said that the 4 blue bloods in the league right now are Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, and Wisconsin. And then he added Iowa. And of course that leaves out, at least this year, Ohio State. But I thought that was notable, that he feels like those are the programs that can consistently do it over and over and over. And breaking into that group is really, really hard. And I thought last night Iowa was, they just reflect that they've been at this for 10 years and Hoiberg's been at it for 2 at Nebraska.
Yeah, I think Nebraska, I think you can buy stock in Nebraska this offseason because the league is going to take a dip. And I also think, getting fans back in Pinnacle Bank Arena will help Nebraska more than it will help most programs. I think Nebraska would have won a few more home games this year, had there been fans in that building. I think the appetite for basketball in Lincoln next year is going to be really high, assuming that, you can do it safely again. And I think, a really highly ballyhooed freshman class, with I think creating sort of a roster built to, enhance those guys and give them the opportunities they deserve to develop. I think, Nebraska stands a really good chance of making a leap. As you said, I don't think it's going to be a leap to number 5, but I think it could easily be a leap to number 9. And at that point, you're relevant. You're 8 and 12 in the Big Ten, and things are kind of fun again. They got to get out of this rut where they're just not competitive. I mean, we've talked about this before, but going back like 6 years now, Nebraska, almost every year they just go on this massive, 10 to 15 game losing streak in February and March, and it just sucks all the life out of the program. And they've just got to find a way to get back to competitiveness. And I think next year sets up pretty well for that.
Do you want to know how many conference wins Nebraska has averaged since Rutgers and Maryland joined the league? Because I'm going to tell you. You want to guess? Conference wins per year.
So 2012? No,
2015. That's when Rutgers and Maryland joined the league.
Okay, so that doesn't count the NCAA tournament season. It does count the 13-5 season, which will change the averages quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing 5.5.
Really good, 5.86. Who's number 1? This may surprise you. Since 2015, which Big Ten team has averaged the most conference wins?
I'm gonna say Purdue.
You got it. 12.86. Purdue is number one, followed by Michigan State at 12.71, Wisconsin at 12.14, and Maryland at 11.71. Michigan's going to get close. Michigan will get close. If they win out, if they beat Michigan State again, they're going to be really close to Maryland. So Nebraska is not last, though. Rutgers is last. But just to give you a sense of it, Rutgers is at 5.14. Nebraska 5.86. Northwestern is at 6. Minnesota is at 6.57. And Penn State's at 7.14. There's your bottom five. Huge gap between Penn State and Illinois. Huge gap. There's your 5. You got to get out of that 5, and you got to get to the middle. And if they can get to they've got it, but they've got to be the best of those 5, and then they've got to somehow find a way to get up to the middle. And that means either knocking out an Illinois, which is hard, or hoping Indiana takes a real plummet when they fire Archie Miller, which they might do. They might not, too. I don't think they should, but they might, and then they're going to be starting all over again.
Hey, Sam?
Yes.
There's a Washington Post story you might want to read.
Yeah, I have read it.
Did you see it?
I did.
About the Big Ten?
Yep. I did. So the story is the Big Ten took its email conversations about its decision-making process to a private server, which is sort of evading transparency.
Big Ten?
Now,
come on.
Now,
yeah,
you may not like what I'm about to say. What I'm going to say is going to partially defend the Big Ten in this, and not defend Big Ten in the miniature, but not in the maximum. Big Ten leaders meet all the time. They met before COVID. They met in person. The media is not privy to those discussions in those meetings, right? Reporters hang out, in hotel lobbies waiting for a comment for a reason. Just like with the Big 12 meetings back in the day. You didn't get to sit in on the meetings. Media didn't know. Zoom calls are private too. Zoom is a private server. You're not going to see any stories from the Washington Post. It says the Big Ten conversations normally done in person on Zoom is an attempt to circumvent public records. If a Big Ten chancellor calls another Big Ten president to talk about whatever, cooking recipes, whatever you want to call it, we're not privy to that either. So there was very little transparency in the league to begin with. I think there is an argument to be made that there should be an email trail related to the decision-making process in the Big Ten. And one of our reporters, Henry Cordes, requested all information that was made part of the Big Ten process. And we got a lot of pointless emails, like just not pointless, but just like data dump of like, well, there's going to be a discussion today, or they're going to announce this, so on and so forth. They took it offline into a private server. The question becomes at that point, why is that wrong? Why is it wrong to go on to Slack? In this case, they went on to a private server that is run by NASDAQ. But why is it wrong to go on to Slack to have conversations about a decision-making process? So the Washington Post story begs the question of, okay, so they did that. And it is wrong because why is it wrong? Why are Zoom calls wrong? Why are Big Ten meetings where we got to sit out in the hotel lobby wrong? Why are they wrong?
Well, like it mentions in the story, part of the idea was they didn't want to start a lengthy reply all text or a lengthy reply all email chain, which as somebody who is part of those on occasion, I totally appreciate that. But when you look into it and you see that some of the intent is, hey, let's do it over here, so we're exempt from FOIA requests.
Yeah,
that's when it's wrong to me. When you're looking to.
So the intention of not of being of shielding the discussions is wrong.
When it comes to something involving public health and your public institution and making these kind of decisions, yeah, I think so.
So the Zoom calls that they've been on should be publicly available.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm just playing the principle out here because The Post story doesn't do that, and it's not going to do that. So the Zoom call should be available. Should we be able to sit in on the Big Ten president and chancellor's meetings when they have them in Chicago or wherever?
I think when a decision is made, there just needs to be a record of how that decision was come to.
Okay.
So I don't think we should be able to sit in all these meetings, but if they make a decision that has of the scope that they did last fall, postponing football, reversing course,
okay,
playing it a season during a pandemic, how and why did they come to that decision?
Sure.
We had these same discussions with the player lawsuit last year, and that's what they were seeking. And I don't think we ever found an answer, because when the Big Ten restarted the season, the lawsuit was dropped and everyone moved on with their lives. So we never found an answer to that. But I think that's the point.
To be clear, I'm not defending the Big Ten's actions. I'm saying that, and I can be a pain in the rear when I do this. I'm playing out the implications that suggest that it's wrong for them to have used the NASDAQ supported server. And the implication is, well, then it's wrong for them to use Zoom too, that they should be using university equipment and university servers that we can then go back as media and watch the entire meetings. By the way, that has happened. If anybody recalls, does anyone recall the school board meeting in the state of Pennsylvania that was done, I don't know, sometime in the summer? That was a full recorded meeting of 3 hours long, and they talked to the Penn State doctor, and the Penn State doctor quoted statistics about myocarditis that were completely wrong. And then everybody reported. And as a result, was a story that was lingering out there for, I don't know, several days, only for him to come back and correct himself. That's an example of a meeting that was completely public. That is an example of a meeting that was completely public. It was a school board meeting, and it was online, a 4.5 hour meeting for people to watch on YouTube. And of course, I covered that story as well. We printed something that was wrong. I mean, we didn't know it was, but the guy gave information that was wrong, and then that was disseminated across many stories.
But because it was made public, was that did that help in part then?
Yes.
Help come to the realization that it was false?
Yes.
I mean, I think there's some value in that. Yeah.
I'm just saying that there's an implication to these kinds of stories that we have to be thoughtful about, because I think the presumption is the Big Ten did something. The Big Ten did this, and this back in the fall. This is true. The Big Ten's optics looked really bad. Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren was not able to adequately explain why they made the decisions they made when he was asked very straightforward questions by Dave Revson of the BTN. Now, I was always impressed with Revson's questions, and Warren didn't handle that very well. Nobody is doubting that. Also, we know that Warren had siloed the presidents and the chancellors away from the athletic directors, which is something we learned after the fact. I'm just saying that when you get the kind of total transparency that we're talking about, it has a way of shaping the decisions in just consequential ways. I can understand why the Big Ten presidents and chancellors did not want to have, discussions and debates over an email chain that then they had to turn over to the media later. Just like I understand why they would have a Zoom call as opposed to a publicly broadcasted meeting over university channels.
Sam,
I get that.
Sam, this is the Big Ten. They're our own worst enemy. We don't care about these horrible, boring Big Ten meetings. All these fuddy-duddies and their bow ties making these decisions with their arrogance. The average fan doesn't care or doesn't want to know about all that stuff.
They don't. That's right.
But the Big Ten caused its own crisis. There's a public trust crisis in that leadership. Whoever the leadership is, CEOs, Kevin Warren, probably not. But I'm saying if they had just come out at the very beginning and been upfront and had a lot more transparency, or any transparency would have been at least some, then nobody would care about this. But now going forward,
that's a great point.
People are wondering, okay, what are you hiding from us? Because you have been hiding from us the whole time.
Right.
And you never explain your decisions because you have no PR sense or any of that stuff. So this is their fault. Generally, people don't want to know this stuff. I've covered conference meetings, and you're in the hallway, and they come out, and a spokesman says nothing, and then you go right. You go talk to coaches, and you go right, and you go home. Nobody cares about this stuff. They want to know about wins and losses and who's on the hot seat. But they care about this because they feel like they got it got ramroded. It was just sort of okay, you guys are trying to hide stuff, so now we're interested. So it's their fault. And can they change it? Well, I don't think the people in place are there to change it. So
I think you and Evan both make really, really good points. The fact that the decision was an incredible magnitude, the way that the Big Ten handled it, the decision to initially postpone and then to re-engage football, one, and then two, the idea that the Big Ten presented this, I don't know if image is the right word, but this sort of front of a lack of transparency, that they were going to try to do the best they could to sort of soft pedal the answer and then hope that everybody agreed with it. And then they didn't agree with it. And a lot of players had a problem with it. And then they had to go back to the table. I think it's entirely possible that a lot of the Big Ten presidents and chancellors in a once in a lifetime moment had a presumption that the Big Ten was a lot closer to the Ivy League than it is to the SEC. And here's the thing. If not for Ohio State football, I think it might be.
No,
the reality is Ohio State brought him back to the table. Ohio State changed this conversation.
Well,
Nebraska helped with that. Nebraska
true.
suing the league helped with that. Don't get me wrong. It was part of the issue. But Ohio State saying we have a chance to win a national championship and we have a Heisman Trophy contender, that school has pushed the Big Ten more toward, hey, we've got to find a blend here. We can't do the Ivy League approach. We've got to find a blend. And that is, I would say that blend is harder for the Big Ten than every other Power 5 league, because I've tried to pay attention to what's going on some of these campuses as it relates to COVID and other issues. And it's just not easy. And I'm not trying to say that I agree with some of the decisions the Big Ten made. I think I have grace, and I'm trying to have grace and understanding for the viewpoint at the University of Michigan, which is very different than the viewpoint at the University of Nebraska. It's just hard. And I don't think the presidents and chancellors managed it that well, but simultaneously I can understand where they're like, what we're not going to do is have 500 pages of discussions out there for people to read in the public where they can try to pigeonhole us into these various perspectives and views. I understand the impulse of that.
We don't want that though. We just want
the Washington Post wanted that.
We want them to be upfront and transparent to begin with. So,
well,
that's all there is.
Yes. Now that's true. That's accurate.
Manage this. They're terrible at managing.
I agree with that. I'm just saying that when a media organization decides that they want to have everything that you can give them, and then the Big Ten's like, well, we don't have much to give you because we did everything on a third-party server. The initial knee-jerk response is, well, that's wrong. Okay, that's fine if it's wrong.
Because they're trying to hide.
It's wrong.
They're trying to
The
hide.
Zoom calls are wrong, and the meetings are wrong, and all those other things are wrong too. You can't suddenly say it's only wrong in this case, but the Zoom calls are okay, and it's okay if we wait in the hotel lobby. Like all of there's no transparency then, and that's the piece where I think we've got to make sure as journalists we're somewhere in the objective middle there, as opposed to saying that the job of the Big Ten is to tell us everything they're thinking all of the time.
I'm gonna say. You look at that and say they're trying to pull an end around play. They're hiding something.
I agree.
Again,
I agree.
That's their problem, and that's why we do this. So
I get that. I agree with that.
They really don't.
I agree. It's just it's interesting. The Big Ten has had a very, very rough year, and I think for rightfully so. Nebraska is critical of their process, and I think there's reasons to be critical of it, reasons to be critical of the leadership. I also think that it is a complex, once in a whatever you want to call it situation that, yes, you're right. The Big Ten botched it in ways that are – the Big Ten received more criticism for playing football this year with great caution than the Big 12 received for not having any caution at all. It doesn't make any sense, but that's exactly what happened. It was like the Big Ten was the political football of the sport, as opposed to the Big 12, which just did whatever the hell they wanted
because of the way they
fine
did
with it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, the other thing that I always pointed out is some of the people who were most vehement about the Big Ten not playing football then were more than happy to rank, group of 5 teams, number 7, number 9. And those programs showed zero caution whatsoever for playing the football season. Oh, Coastal Carolina is the story of the season. Coastal Carolina didn't postpone its season for a month. So somehow the Big Ten ended up both being the league that is most frustrating to those who love football and equally most frustrating to those who didn't want to see football played at all, which just gives you it gives you the impression that the biggest mistake the Big Ten made was they didn't have any confidence in their own decision. And they should have just stuck to their original plan and went with that. Instead, they showed this hesitation and caution. And the thing that people don't like about the Big Ten's approach was the caution and the hesitation. Yeah. Whereas, again, Conference USA, Sun Belt, Big 12, they largely escaped that criticism.
Okay, well, now that I've hijacked this, I'm going to leave.
No, it's good.
So, why don't you guys talk about Husker baseball? I'll be anxious to see. I'm going to go watch UNO play today in the sunshine.
Cool.
So, Evan, I hope to see you at a game soon. And
yes,
we'll talk again next week, maybe.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Hey, Sam, just let me chime in one moment here on this. To your point, I mean, it was crazy last year how September 4th. All the conversation is, not safe to play. Don't think it's safe to play. I can't believe the Big Ten's actually going to play. And, meanwhile, there's like 50,000 people at Kyle Field, watching Florida, Texas A&M. It's like, what?
That's right. And at the end of the year, it's, Texas A&M, they belong in the playoff, and Ohio State doesn't. Again, I feel like the Big Ten was the league that was like the tipping point. And once the Big Ten decided it was going to play football again, and here came all the other leagues. And I'm still trying to figure out why exactly the Big Ten's caution was more offensive than the Big 12's complete lack of caution. And to me, it's just strange. And so the Big Ten keeps getting hammered on this stuff. I mean, they're still, and this story is, again, I think it's a legitimate story. I think there's something legitimate to say about having all these conversations on a third-party server. There's no question that that's not necessarily, but are we under the impression that the Big 12 didn't do that? It doesn't. It's an interesting conversation that will be ongoing. The Big Ten's reputation is what it is. Nebraska baseball. Evan. The season is here. It's been almost a year since Nebraska baseball has played a baseball game. They're going to play 44, scheduled to play 44 Big Ten games. No Big Ten tournament. All kinds of new players. Aggressive recruiting staff. Seems to be the best offensive potential in a long time. Here's where I'll start. Will Bolt did not really have a year one. Most of the time, year ones are built are about establishing culture, being who you're going to be as a program. Is this going to be that kind of typical year one, or is this a year one that can be more special than that?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, it's interesting because they lose the season in mid-March, almost a year ago today, a week shy of that, and as disappointing as that was, last year's Nebraska team was not probably going to contend for a regional. I don't think their pitching wasn't very good. They were figuring a lot of things out. They were off to a kind of a rough start against some good opponents. But they used that extended offseason to reshape the roster. And I think what's interesting about how they did it was not just, it wasn't like Nebraska basketball where it's everybody who's different. They add 16 guys, they lose 15, and almost universally those swaps occurred kind of at the bottom end of the roster. Most of the guys who left were guys who weren't playing a ton anyway, and the guys they brought in are guys who probably will play fairly key roles here sooner rather than later. So like they obviously you don't want to lose a season, but I think what they gained from that offseason relative to what they lost really thrust this program into a more interesting place. And you see the preseason coaches poll comes out earlier this week, and Nebraska's not in the top 6. I would argue that's because in this climate of college baseball where most seniors are coming back, it seems like in this climate when the shortened draft, MLB draft really forced a lot of guys back to school, you're seeing a lot of teams that are very similar, whereas Nebraska's quite a bit different. They have their 4-game rotation this weekend. 3 of those guys have never pitched or have never started for Nebraska. Their bullpen is totally different than last year. They're probably going to start 2 freshmen on the infield. And so, I mean, I'm obviously following it pretty closely. I feel like they've upgraded in most of those areas, and that's why I feel like they can take some big steps forward. But if you're kind of looking at this from a national perspective and you look at the league, Nebraska is more of an unknown quantity than I think what you see elsewhere. So to me, these first couple weekends are really interesting. These teams that Nebraska plays are teams they should have some success against. And if they do, I think that sets the tone for what could be a fun season for them. If they don't, like, it's tough because it's just league only. This isn't a non-conference situation. You know, in a typical year, Nebraska's playing in mid-February and maybe they split their first 8 games and, you know, whatever. Like that's you're still off to a good start because you're playing good non-conference teams. But if you split against Purdue, which is, I think, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, I mean, that already is putting you behind the 8 ball that you just need to win a bunch of games going forward. So it'll be a really interesting first couple of weekends, I think. And I believe like the guys they added were upgrades. And so I think, they're going to be in contention this season.
Where are they strongest?
Offense. As I've gone through the different teams in the league, like a lot of teams have arms and everybody's deeper. Like that's the thing. Like you can look at a team, any team, and say, oh, they're deeper. They're better than they've ever been. Well, that's the case for everybody in college baseball for all the reasons that I put out there. But when you have, especially in the Big Ten, these 4-game weekends, 7-inning game followed by a 9-inning game and a doubleheader, I mean, everybody's going to be reaching down into their bullpen. And I think the guys that Nebraska added are the types that can win some games and score some runs for them. I mean, the last 2 or 3 years, Nebraska will have its top 5 or 6 hitters in a lineup that are pretty good. But man, that bottom third is just a revolving door of guys that they hope stick, and that rarely have done so. And they actually have guys now, I think 10, 11, 12 deep, where you could say, these guys can get some hits for you and can win some games. So that's a big difference. And I guess the other thing I would add is when you look at what Nebraska's done in the postseason, and we've made a lot of it over the years where they've just flamed out, whether that's the Big Ten tournament, whether that's the regionals, a lot of that's because they haven't had the depth. They might have that ace. They might even have the number 2 guy. They might have a couple of good hitters or, big boppers, but they haven't, once you fit that second and third game in a series, like they've just kind of run out and they don't have the depth that you see a lot of the really good teams in college baseball have. So it seems like for the first time in a while, they actually do have that. And we can go through some of the names if you want, but their infield's a lot better. Their outfield's incredibly deep. Mojo Haggie's in his 12th season at Nebraska now, it seems like. So yeah, it's going to be fun. And the way Will Bolt structures his offense is different from Erstad too. I'm not sure how much the casual fan kind of dives into that, but Erstad was big on kind of that major league approach where guys would come in and they'd take care of their business. And, Erstad would encourage guys to approach the game like he did, be good at everything, be a well-rounded player. Will Bolt's much more about guys having defined, specialized roles. You're good at putting the ball in play. You're going to be a table setter. You're going to be a speed guy. You're going to be a a gap to gap hitter. So don't try to, swing out of your shoes for home runs and things like that. So I'll be really interested to see how that affects some of the existing guys like Mojo Hagge. Like he was a guy in 2019 who tried to be an all-around player and he hit some home runs, but Will Bolton, his staff see this guy as someone who's going to be a really effective bunter, somebody who should be putting the ball in play and pressuring a defense. So like we didn't really get to see last year what Bolt's approach, how that would affect some of the Husker hitters. And I think this year we're finally going to get a sense of what that looks like. And I think it's going to be, pretty potent, especially based on what you saw when he was an assistant at Nebraska in the early 2010s. I mean, there were a lot of dynamic offenses there, and he was a big reason for that. So I guess that's something else here to watch here these first few weekends for sure.
There's Sam and Evan, there's an inherent disadvantage, obviously, for northern teams in college baseball who, typically go south at the start of the year and come back, 1-6 or whatever. And I'm trying to think of the last time Nebraska was, really got off to a good start. And, one byproduct of this scheduling situation is, maybe this is the year where Nebraska really, truly gets off to a good start. I mean, it's, I'm trying to remember the last time Nebraska was in the top 25, in mid-March or at the end of March. And I'm not saying they're going to be there this year, but I think there's a real chance to generate enthusiasm and momentum, when you don't have to go down to Arizona or Texas and play Arizona State or Oregon State, the first 2 weeks of the year. I mean, I think there's an opportunity here for Nebraska based on the schedule and the way, the Big Ten has set this up for this program to sort of, make a name for itself the first month of the season.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword because in theory, Nebraska should start stronger, but they're also kind of expected to start stronger with some of the teams that they're playing. Whereas, in the past, if Nebraska is going south, like last year, they opened at Baylor, they had a series at Arizona State. They won 1 out of 3 games in both of those series, but those wins would have greatly benefited their postseason resume as the season would have gone on. Whereas, if they take 3 out of 4 against Purdue this weekend, if they do the same even against Iowa and Ohio State the following weekend in Minnesota, like that still doesn't do a lot for you. You're just kind of satisfying the bare minimum, I guess. Like you're not really building a resume. You're just kind of you're just not giving them a reason not to include you, if that makes sense. So
I guess I made the point not so much as a resume builder, but just as sort of like with a young program and a lot of unproven guys, it would seem to me an opportunity to, almost the old Bill Snyder, scheduling model where you persuade your guys that they're better than they are based on the competition that they play. And, that's obviously not going to keep you afloat for forever, but it just seems like the rare season in the last 5 or 10 years where Nebraska, might get off to a really good start.
It's also known as the Dana Altman model at Creighton basketball. Not going to play anybody too good in the non-conference. Got to get to those 20 wins. Remember the year Creighton won 27 games and didn't make the NCAA tournament? They're like 27-5. That's how bad the schedule was. Okay, over/under. Evan, over/under.
Over/under
20. I'm going to tell. I'm ready. What's the over/under number on the wins it'll take to make the NCAA tournament for Nebraska? Play 44 games.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's unprecedented, right? Nebraska's not been in this situation. I'm of the opinion that this is going to impact how many teams the Big Ten sends to the postseason. And not everyone believes that. Like they sent 5 last year. Nebraska was 2 years ago, I guess, in 2019. Nebraska was an at-large. And most of those teams made it based on the strength of their non-conference. And so 3 of those at-large teams, I think their league record 2 years ago was 15-9. Yeah. And Michigan, if you recall, they go to the College World Series final. They weren't even a guarantee to make the postseason at all unless they won a couple games at the Big Ten tournament in Omaha. So being 6 games over 500 didn't guarantee you much, just in terms of what you did in the league alone. So, 44 games, I don't know, 30, 34, somewhere in that range, maybe. And it depends on who you beat. Like if Nebraska can take a series, or whoever can take a series from Michigan or take a series from Indiana, that's going to hold a lot more water than sweeping Northwestern, which is going to be really bad this year. So, it depends on who you beat and how everything else shakes out. But the worst case scenario for the Big Ten is all these teams beat up on each other. There is like little separation at the top. Your regular season champ gets the automatic berth, and then like maybe they throw a bone to somebody else like that. I think that's kind of how it's going to go. Is you're going to have maybe 2 teams make it this year. And as much as we criticize the Big Ten today, their league only decision was about money. That's pretty obvious. The baseball is not a revenue generating sport for almost every school at the Division I level, so it wasn't a priority for them. But yeah, their baseball teams are going to pay for it from a competitive standpoint. I can't tell you how many emails and questions I've had from fans asking why the Big Ten won't allow fans to attend outdoor baseball games.
Do you know why?
Just to keep a uniform policy throughout the sports. And especially like you talk about, they're playing at Round Rock this weekend. There were 4 teams there last week, Big 12 SEC teams, big crowds in the exact same venue. And now 4 Big Ten teams are there this weekend. Nobody outside of friends and family. It's just, the Big Ten is just in a different world this season in terms of college baseball. Weekend only, no fans. You look around and see these showcase events for other leagues. It's a total
world except for basketball.
Yeah. Because of the money.
They want to make that Final Four.
Sure.
I think basketball is the league sport. I think that if anything has been proven true, it's that. You want to know why? My theory on why there's been more Big Ten teams in the Big Ten tournament or in the NCAA tournament is based on a story Dirk wrote about 10 years ago. You remember that story you wrote, Dirk?
Yeah.
Where Jim Delaney saber rattled breaking the Big Ten off and running a Northern College World Series. Yeah, I think that's why. I think the NCAA committee's like, all right. We need to put some more Big Ten teams in this thing because we're not running 2 of these things. Yeah, it worked too. It was smart. That was old school boss politics right there is what that was. That wasn't idealism at work. That was, if you don't give us more teams, we'll go run our own.
I will never certain interviews you always remember. I mean, I've been working at the World-Herald for 16 years now. But I still remember that interview. I remember where I was, and he was on an exercise bike or a treadmill. He was doing the interview while he was working out, and he was really in a mood. I mean, it was, it was exactly what you just said, like, hey, we don't need you. We'll go do this thing in August. It was, yep. And then the funny part was Harvey Perlman trying to basically defend him. And Harvey hadn't put in nearly the same amount of research that Delaney had. So,
well, the dominoes fell after that. I mean, they started getting more teams in, and the records didn't dramatically change. Yeah. Well, now, he's not the Big Ten commissioner anymore, and it won't surprise me if the NCAA penalizes the Big Ten pretty significantly.
I think so, but like we talk a lot about how the Big Ten in football is a lot better now than it was 10 years ago when Nebraska joined.
Oh yeah.
The same is true for baseball. I mean, that was a league 10 years ago that was it was a facilities wasteland. Yes, and it was about the money. I remember being at the Big Ten tournament a few years ago in Omaha, and you have all the coaches get up there, and it's kind of awkward because there aren't a lot of media there. And I asked like 80% of the questions. It felt like when they brought in 4 coaches at a time. But one thing that was really enlightening to me was all these coaches talking about in 2018, I think it was, had 2019, all the overflow of that BTN money was finally starting to hit the baseball programs, right? The football facilities had been built. They couldn't find a way to spend it. So it starts flowing down to some of those other sports. And so there are a lot of other baseball programs in the Big Ten in the last 7 or 8 years that have new facilities, that are hiring coaches more at a national level, that are more competitive with those salaries. And so that's a big part of it too, is the league is just a lot better. And you know, it's starting to show up in the postseason bids too.
Yep. Okay, so they play Iowa 5 times in the next 3 weeks, right?
Yeah, twice in Minneapolis next weekend, and then at Iowa City for 3 after that. Go figure.
Iowa's been a pretty good program. Do you kind of sense the season might go one way really good, or the other way, based on those games and the games against Ohio State next weekend? There's 7 total over the next 3 weekends against those teams.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Iowa and Ohio State are both teams that could conceivably make regionals. I think Iowa's really similar to Nebraska, has a lot back. Ohio State has a ton of arms. I don't know about the offense for those guys, but yeah, I mean, Purdue this weekend, I think if you're Nebraska, you need to win at least 3 of those games to feel pretty good. Purdue doesn't have much of an offense, and so I think you really need to start strong this weekend if you're Nebraska. But yeah, I mean, if you're sub 500 after 3 weekends, you're in trouble, because again, you don't have those non-conference wins to fall back on. Like you're gonna have to go on a winning streak, and it's just, that's all it's about this year, is winning ugly, winning pretty. You got to win the series. You can't lay any eggs against the Michigan States and the Penn States of the world, and you're playing everybody this year. So there's just no margin for error. And yeah, I think it's just about winning. Like it's that simple. And if they don't, there's nothing else. There's no other measurement by which the NCAA is going to put Nebraska in, unless they're winning a bunch of games. Pretty simple.
All right. That's good. We could talk a little recruiting here really quickly. I got to get going in a minute for a recruiting story I'm working on. But Nebraska offered a quarterback, Richard Torres, out of San Antonio, 6'6", 210. They like him a lot, based on what I've gathered from the recruit side of it. You know, they offered him a scholarship, and they don't usually do that unless they like a guy quite a bit, and they like his skill set. He can throw the ball a long way. Hasn't played a lot football last year because of COVID. Didn't get to go to any camps or showcases because of COVID. And so is, darn near off the radar. I mean, forget under it. A guy that only has one other offer, and that's from the hometown team, Texas San Antonio. So that'll be something to watch. I think Ernest Hausman, the athlete out of Columbus High School, Dirk's alma mater, is probably going to be committing here relatively soon, and I think Nebraska's got a good chance of getting him. Hausman might be the first commit in the class. I think that's absolutely possible. In other words, Nebraska's reputation, of demise of in-state recruiting might be a little exaggerated, because they might be able to get that guy. What else in recruiting? Caden Helms keeps getting offers at Bellevue West, got an LSU offer. I expect that he'll get a Clemson offer eventually, maybe Alabama. I think Helms is very similar to Thomas Fidoni as a national recruit, and will probably end up as a top 100 player by the time we're, next fall.
How about this? Like, it sounds like we know the NCAA has the recruiting dead period through May, but it sounds like there are some programs, and maybe Nebraska will be one, that will start to urge recruits to come up on their own, maybe to buy a ticket to the spring game if there are fans allowed in some capacity. It sounds like maybe Nebraska could be getting a little creative in terms of how it's starting to finally bring guys back after.
Yeah, they can't stop anybody from buying tickets to a spring game. $10 ticket. Yeah. They cannot stop anyone from buying a ticket to a game. That's right. They can't meet with them technically, but they can see the crowd. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, other schools are going to try to do that too. There's going to be a lot of competition for those players. I'm sure, Nebraska can perhaps coordinate that to some degree, but I don't think they can buy the tickets for the prospects, obviously. So the prospects would have to buy the tickets themselves. They would have to sit in the stands. They wouldn't be able to, tour the facilities. on like an unofficial visit. I don't think. But I think if you open up all of the facilities to the fans, I don't know. Like,
we're gonna open up facilities for tours to high school students ages 17 to 19 who are between 6 foot and 6'6", who run between a 4.3 and a 4.7 40.
These guys work really hard. I mean, I want to be clear that Nebraska's recruiting staff and its assistant coaches, they put in the work on the trail. Calling recruits. I've called a lot of recruits this week. And we're starting to ramp up our recruiting stuff because it's getting that time. Nebraska works really hard. Abby Barmore, our colleague, had a really good story from Ryan Held just about the way that they structure it with Zoom calls and the way that they go through the process and so on and so forth. And so it's notable, and they do a really good job. And I think there's, Husker fans are concerned about the recruiting and are they going to get these guys? Are they going to get this? Well, when you've had several losing seasons in a row, it gets harder to land the very best players. But this group has shown consistently year over year that they're really good at this. So their process is good, their structure is good, their organization is good, their sales pitch is good. They might lose out on a guy or two because they're not winning. Because there are kids that are like, I want to see it now. I want to see it before I join it. And so it could be a little challenging before the season begins to convince guys to necessarily jump into the class. So we'll see. But the work is there. All right. That is our podcast for this week. Does anybody else have anything to add? There's my interview question of the day.
No, bust out the sunscreen this weekend, boys.
Oh, I'm going to. I don't know if I'm going to hit the course. I don't know if the courses in Lincoln are going to be open. They probably will.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me? I bet Holmes was open on February 20th.
Oh, was it? Wow. Yeah, it's probably open then. I might go over to Benson and see how the damage on the 10th hole there is from that food truck running in. I haven't played at Benson in a long time.
Hey, we should play Benson sometime this spring.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love Benson. I love Benson National.
Yeah, I've got a lot of memories there. Not all good. There's a hole on that course I've never parred.
I'm gonna guess number 5.
No, it's not number 5. It's the long par. Well, it's not that long. It's like 390 yards uphill on the back nine, par 4.
14.
Mm-hmm. Yep, never parred it. Not once. Only hole on the course I've never parred. I have parred 5. Surprisingly enough, I don't know why I've never parred 14, but I haven't. So it's my St. Andrews 17. No, not really. All right. We're going on and on now. Hey, thanks, Husker fans, for listening to today's podcast. We will be back next week to talk about Nebraska's performance in the Big Ten tournament. By then, I think by the time we talk, it'll be over. Evan will be going to Minneapolis for baseball, so we'll probably talk to you on Thursday of next week. Thanks, Husker fans.